Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on SMBs and DIY, those two three-letter acronyms that seem to go so well together. We have a powerhouse panel this morning and only 30 minutes, so I want to dive right into it and give each of our panelists plenty of time to share their experience and knowledge with you. One thing at the outset that I want to attempt to do is to leave maybe 5 minutes at the end for audience questions, because I know people will have interesting questions to ask of our panelists. But let's go ahead and get right into it. So the companies that are represented on the stage here, ReachLocal, GoDaddy, Web.com, each of them have a depth of experience in selling it into the SMB space. And this is a question that maybe a perennial question. There's this huge addressable market. We've only penetrated a margin of it. How can we do more? The challenge that strikes me as especially interesting is that we speak of SMBs maybe kind of off the cuff as a generic group, but in fact, small businesses think of themselves each as unique with a unique set of problems. So the challenge of scaling an offering to thousands of customers, each of whom thinks of themselves as a unique business with its own particular needs, is one that I'm glad I'm not trying to solve right now, but I know you guys have spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I don't know if Sharon, if you might want to start with some thoughts on that topic.
Okay, thank you, Damian, and hi, everybody. So I think, first off, we use this term SMB so liberally, but I don't think there is an SMB class as we know it. I think there's a lot of segmentation within that market, and I think you have to address the right segment with the right approach. In terms of scaling, I don't think you can do it without the right type of technology platform. Within ReachLocal, the reason we're able to scale is that we can run unique campaigns tailored to clients, making all the right bid creative changes to get the results that unique client needs, because we have unique tech with algorithms that drive the platform. But then we wrap that in service, because the other thing for a big piece of the SMB population, they actually want more than just a tech platform driving them results. And a lot of research has demonstrated that they want a personalized experience in terms of somebody to be able to talk to who can understand their business, can talk their language, and help them understand the right next steps for them. So I believe it's a combination of having the right tech platform, but with the right service model geared to the right segment.
Stephen, you want to go continue?
Yeah, I was going to say, fantastic way to start out the panel in terms of how do you scale, not to even thousands, but millions and millions of customers. There's 460 or so million small businesses globally. You're not going to get there serving them one at a time. And Sharon said this very nicely, there's no such thing as a small business when you go and try to reach a small business. It's a person, right? It's the owner, it's the person inside that business who's running the business and making decisions. And they do, rightly so, believe they have a unique market, a unique offering. So what I think about is, A, you need to love the idea that you're going to spend time talking to each person, not to each business. Second, it's a vertical play, but unfortunately, vertical is going to get you trapped in a niche. So having worked at Intuit and now GoDaddy for almost 25 years, the goal that many businesses have to think through is, am I going to be the best vertical solution provider and command a very high price point and limit the number of folks that will come my way? Or am I going to find a horizontal set of solutions that I can serve and find a mass market way to reach them and bring great customer care? And we can go in more depth on how to do that over time.
But you guys have taken the horizontal route, would you say?
Correct. Yeah, so we build horizontal solutions that are good, not just for all small businesses, but for people globally, and then wrap it in free customer care so that if you have a how do I question, a something's broken question, you can always contact us 24/7 with a live person behind it.
Cool. Sam, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I think we fundamentally agree to the challenge of addressing SMBs as a unified kind of target audience. You need to segment them. They're in unique verticals. They're in unique markets. They're also in unique situations in their life stage. So SMB is a small, it's a medium business, they're fundamentally different. And on the other hand, we have the operational challenge to gain scale and be economically efficient. So you have to bridge that gap, and I think as Sharon said, you have to be very customized at the front end, at the service side of things, but you have to be very mass production oriented in the back end and the fulfillment in your technology. So you need a mass customization approach that you enable through operational excellence within your company. So it's not only the product that has to be kind of driving value for the customer. You have to have an operational process in place that allows you to scale a platform that is on the front end perceived as very customized and very unique to each customer situation.
So let me bounce off of that a little bit, because as a product person, I tend to think of the problem as one that can be solved through a product, that there's some killer app out there for the SMB market, which I know we're not talking about just one offering or one type of customer, but whatever problem you might choose to try to attack, that you can design a technology that's going to be perfect for that solution. But I think each of you might have a slightly different story to tell about support, service as the components that are the real differentiators. So I guess the question is there a killer app for SMBs, or is that just the wrong question entirely? Sharon?
Well, I think, Damian, the first thing to say is, history is littered with killer apps and amazing solutions that never got anywhere, right? Because at the end of the day, sales and marketing are the drivers. And I think if you're starting a business, right, yes, you want to be focused on your client and the problem you're solving and drive your product for that, but you have to focus on what your client acquisition model is and how you're going to make that work. And personally, for me, the thing I always focus on is LTV to CAC, so your long-term value from the client versus your cost of acquisition. And if you're selling a product at $9.99 a month, it's going to have to be a marketing-driven acquisition strategy, but that can still be expensive. But if your order values are somewhere between $3,000 and $10,000 a month, which is where ReachLocal is, actually then you can afford more of a solution-based approach involving real people on the ground. So I think the industry has to focus on the client acquisition model that's the right fit for the segment they're going after. And that's the thing that I think very often gets in the way of many wonderful entrepreneurs that are developing great solutions, but building a great product's not enough.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'll tell a story from GoDaddy's history. So you might think of a killer app as a domain, right? Every small business owner should have a domain name. Seems simple enough, yet here we are 20 years later, and still only half of small businesses have a domain and a website, period. If I go back to GoDaddy in the early 2000s, we had the same market share as basically a bunch of other folks in the space. We went in to be disruptive to network solutions, low price point, and yet with a great killer product, free support, we had the same share as everyone else. It wasn't until we went in with a Super Bowl ad that was quite controversial in 2005 that we wound up going from one of many to the market leader. And that mass marketing approach worked, and then we had to reinvent it again and again. And so killer product is great without a mass market approach, and our average customer spends $120 a year, $10 a month with GoDaddy. So finding the operational excellence of how do you provide a product and make money while providing free support 24/7 is a real challenge. So business model, marketing, and you need to have a great product.
So Stephen, $120 a year, if somebody draws on your support resources enough, you're going to end up losing money on customers. But that's still worth it for you guys.
Totally. I think that the small business owner, as you all know, that individual has 5 jobs during the day, 10 jobs during the day, where they're trying to find customers, they're trying to make customers happy. They might have a tech issue. If that tech issue gets anywhere in the way of them making customers happy or generating another sale, I think we haven't done our customer the right service. So yes, we have to find ways to both serve the customer well at that price point, and it means putting in a system where when we get contacted by a customer, that feedback has to get to our product team right away, and then we need to feed that back into reducing those what I'll call bad calls. I'm happy to have someone call us and ask for help. We can solve that efficiently and then win the customer's trust. that will turn into a long-term relationship for us.
Right. So it sounds like you, maybe all three of you, are trying to invest in a relationship that's not months or a year, but rather many years.
Correct. Yeah, the metrics that we look at are, how much does it cost to acquire a customer? That customer has to stay with us for many years. We happen to have a wonderful customer acquisition cost in the $60-ish range, so we get very good economics quite quickly. But to make that customer successful long term, we need to find out how can we make their business successful. Therefore, we need to invest in our products and in that relationship with the customer over time.
Maybe some short comment from our side. So Web.com is more a service company than a product company. So we focus a lot on giving the customer the right experience. Because in our view, yes, you have to have a good product, but in absolute terms, the best product doesn't save it for you, doesn't cut it. So you need to actually create the perception of value through a good service. And SMBs or small business they're not corporate people. They're people, right? So they work with their customers directly, they work with their employees directly. So they want to be treated in their conversation, the context of their marketing also as individuals. So the service part is very important, and in that conversation you set the bar up to which you have to live and perform with your products. So even if your website product isn't the killer app in the market, the perception of the customer is what actually makes him stay, makes him want to do the next step with you.
Yeah, the product can allow you referrals, and again, for most mass market companies that want to become at scale, you need customers to say great things about your product, but you need to get that flywheel turning, and figuring out between the product and your marketing efforts, how do you get the flywheel turning is still the secret sauce of getting companies to the scale that we are up here.
So I find this interesting in terms of the nature of this market having certain requirements to build out a support infrastructure that many small businesses starting out might find especially challenging. So I think of that in contrast with a company like Instagram, 8 or 9 guys, millions of users, right? You guys are not in that business. And so should that be daunting to a startup? What would you advise to someone who is entering this space now? You want to start, Sharon?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think you have to decide which segment you're focused on. I mean, as I started out, the SMB market is absolutely huge, and it runs the full gamut from, your very small entrepreneur, maybe 1 to 3 people, very little money to spend, may well be very much a do-it-yourself, very tech savvy type of individual, to businesses that have, 50 to 100 employees. They've probably got over $1 million in revenue. They've got a very real marketing budget, but no marketing professionals, and they just want to run their business. And in that case, what they're looking for is more of a tailored solution that involves service, somebody that's going to help them figure out the roadmap of how they become effective and successful. And their bottom line is, are there customers coming in the door for me? Is my marketing working? What am I getting for it? And increasingly, I think in whatever segment, they care about results and they understand what results are. So I think, when you look at what you're trying to do in the market, focusing on which client are you trying to serve,
right,
and then going after that in a very meaningful way is critical. I come across too many young companies that have a really great idea, but they're trying to be everything to everybody. And I think that's a mistake. So I think focus is the first bit of advice I would give people.
There was a gentleman on stage yesterday from a company called Slice, which is a startup, I think, in New York, focused just on pizza restaurants, right? So that's the kind of approach that you're talking about. You can solve the problem for that segment. Don't try to take on everything at once. Yeah. Steve?
Yeah. Well, why don't we let Sam, and then we'll break up
Yeah, sure. Maybe a different thought from a different angle. So we all know we're competing for the time or mind share of the SMB. So once we have built a relationship with them, once we have them in a conversation, and we build the trust with our services and our products, then they look to us to help them with more. So there's the immediate need or the opportunity for us to serve them with another adjacent service. It can be within digital marketing, but it can be even without, or outside of that, like with a logo, with stationery, with something. So kind of you quickly, when you're good in servicing the customer, you're confronted with another problem that they want more from you. And so I think, even though I agree with a startup company has to be really focused on product, on their vertical, and be very, leading edge with that, they soon need to think about, like, how can they maybe through a, partner network or something, enable to capture more value from the customer with whom they build a great relationship with.
Great, yeah, and I'll add maybe a very practical piece of advice to folks trying to build a scale business. So when starting out, having a product team and then a growth team next to the product team that can be working on customer acquisition testing, on are you going after channels, is it a particular social opportunity that you're going after? So finding a way to carve out a very small but still meaningful percentage of your team to say, how are we going to find customers? Let's build the business model metrics alongside of the product metrics. Doing those things together will help you figure out, once you know, what segment am I going after, what other services can I bring, how big will this business be, how do I scale it, and having those two things in parallel is really important early on in the life of a company trying to serve the small business market.
And I think, Stephen, to emphasize on that point, when you get ready to go looking for meaningful funding, that is what funders are going to be looking at. Do you understand your business model? Do you have the right metrics? How are you tracking them? That is going to be way more important to your success than look at this great demo of my product.
And maybe an and. Demo product and great metrics.
Well, Sharon, you mentioned to me that at ReachLocal you guys have a feedback loop from the customer back into the product roadmap as an ongoing thing. Maybe you could speak to that briefly?
Sure. I've spent my whole career going into companies and often seeing great product and tech organizations building away, but without the voice of the client at the center of that. And so what happens is that your resource is being spent on things that aren't meaningful to the client. The client is, so what? So what we do at ReachLocal is we are constantly asking ourselves, what difference is this going to make to the client? Are they going to care about this? And making sure the voice of the client is at the center of every decision we make. And that really has allowed us to make sure that the money we spend is being spent on the right things for the client. And frankly, that was the key to turning ReachLocal around and getting the growth that we have, is that we focused on delivering to the client the things that they really valued, and then making sure we stayed very, very close to the client. So that's something else I would really urge everybody to do.
Do you guys agree that there's been a bit of a shift in this industry toward listening more to the end client, listening more to the user, or is that something you've done all along? Because I think user-centered product design is it's a trend right now for a reason, because we tried maybe in a previous iteration of this industry to sell SMBs what we thought they needed and to beat them over the head until they hopefully accepted that truth. But now I think the orientation is a little bit more toward listening. I don't know, Sam, Stephen, agree with that?
Sure. So I think the SMB, the SMB world sits in the middle between the B2C and the B2B sales approach, right? So in the B2B, you have your customer panels, you talk to them, you really know what they want to build custom solution. B2C, you're transmitting, at least in the past it was more like that, and you see what sticks and what doesn't. Now, as the SMB world, it sits in the middle, and I think as we're getting more experienced and sophisticated in being able to assimilate and process all the feedback that we're getting, that we learned that within the B2C world through social media and analyzing trends and integrating that in our product development, we see that in the SMB world as well, because if you ask them, they tell you, and the answers are all over the place, so you need to be prepared to really dig into it and analyze the data and see, what is the pattern, what is really, what matters and what doesn't from the feedback in order to integrate that into your products. And I think in the past, we were not sophisticated enough to draw our conclusions from that, but I think we're getting there.
So would you say you make meaningful changes to the product as a result of customer feedback today, yes?
Yeah, and I think we always wanted to do that, and sometimes it's more prevalent, sometimes not, but we're getting now more sophisticated and actually gaining the insights from the feedback that we're getting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a lot of how close you are to the customer depended upon the model that you might have started with. So many folks in the space to try to solve this, how do you scale to reach millions of small businesses, went through channels. Well, if you don't have a mechanism to go basically 2 steps from your product team through a partner channel to the end customer, it was very hard to get feedback. And GoDaddy was very fortunate that we've been primarily direct from day one, but we've been bringing on more partners now. Our ability to bring those 2 sets of feedback, we need to build for the partners model and get that customer feedback loop is really key. And there are different business models involved in both as well. So I think as the industry has been trying to balance the channel view of the world, build things for the channel and be sales driven versus no, let's be end user pull driven, that I think does change the dynamic of how important customer feedback winds up being to you and the development teams.
Makes sense. Let me switch gears slightly. So the title of the panel is SMB DIY. A lot of what we've been talking about so far would seem to argue against DIY as a model. The need for a big support team, the need to listen to the customer. I suppose you can do that through analytics, but human beings may be involved in that process as well. So is DIY, how does DIY fit into the mix? Or should it be do it for me, or what is the right approach?
Yeah, I was going to say, you could split DIY maybe into 2 different components. There's small businesses trying to find you and buy services from you, and then how is it that you're going to deliver those services back to the small business? So there's the marketing channel, and DIY hopefully in one sense means small businesses are seeking your solution out. And then when they seek you out, you can still have an array of solutions from do it yourself to do it with me to do it for me. I think if you're going to hit scale, the concept of getting to DIY marketing, referral-driven mass market has to be there. And then on the services side, I continue to see tremendous numbers of small businesses, certainly in the early stages of their life cycle, needing to be DIY. They don't have enough money to pay for a solution brought to them by a professional. It's just not a business model that works. And so I believe DIY is still a key element, and over half of the sites that we see in the world are still DIY. As those businesses mature, they then have a choice. Do they go out and obtain professional services on top, or do they want to continue to manage it themselves?
From a ReachLocal perspective, we're certainly serving more of the do it with me or do it for me segment of the market. And that market is huge. And if you look at what smaller local businesses are doing today, they're having to use multiple marketing tactics. Yes, they need a website. They've got to get found wherever the consumer is searching or surfing. They're now using multiple tactics, whether it's SEM, they're using social, and they just, unless they have a dedicated marketing professional on staff, which many do not have, they've got no choice but to seek a provider that can provide them the right technology platform, but actually wrapped in the right service model. Because otherwise, they're spending so much time trying to figure out their marketing, they're not running their business. So I think there's a very important role for, help me get it done, help me be successful, and help me spend my money right.
I think that's certainly true along the maturity curve of a small business, but we had the discussion just before. There are a new type of small businesses coming online. It's the freelancers, it's the millennials, it's the ones that seek for instant gratification, it's the ones that are tech savvy. So they're actually venturing out and want to get a product now. At the moment if they're choosing, immediately fulfilled. It can be a little bit more complex, so they figure it out. But again, that's the entry point. Once they grow, their challenges grow as well, and then they need an on-ramp to a more handheld model, a more do it for me, do it with me oriented model. But I think there is certainly a space for DIY being an early entry point, enabling them to make their first steps. But then you have to quickly follow up with more robust service model to help them do
and if I could build on that, the reality is, I don't know if you all saw, but a few weeks ago there was a big article talking about how more large national brands are shifting their dollars to local advertising. And so smaller local businesses are having to compete with these very sophisticated large brands. Now the good news is they can. Because of the digital capabilities that exist today, they can compete on a local level. But to be able to compete, they have to take advantage of the sophisticated targeting platforms that exist for them today and the different channels that exist for them today. And I think it's very hard for them to do that on their own. And again, I think that speaks to, you know, the value that can be brought by a strong solution partner to the market.
Yeah, the key here is when we talk about growth for small businesses, if you look at the even, quote, bigger small businesses from a revenue perspective, the vast majority still do not have dedicated marketing. There just aren't people that are doing that job inside of a 3-person business. So the goal here is what can you bring to the business owner so that he or she can both run the business day to day, use money effectively, because the instant gratification and the ROI measures that they have, while not as sophisticated as the bigger businesses, they watch the bottom line of their business. Is my checking account going up or down at the end of the month? And if you can't deliver on that promise, they will not continue working with you. So there's a very narrow window in which your services can fit that make the customer happy, make you money, and wind up finding a big enough business so that it's something interesting down the road.
Great. So I could keep talking, you guys could keep talking, but we have about 4.5 minutes left, and I'm guessing that there are some questions. I'd like to leave some time for that. So anybody? Neg in the back? We have a mic. Here it comes.
Hi, so you all talked about getting the voice of the customer into product development. I'm wondering if you could comment, all of you, specifically on how that happens. How do you get that feedback, and how do you ensure that it gets into the product development process? How does it really work?
Sure. So I can give 3 really specific examples. So we use a combination of a net promoter survey that we do in regular cadence to our existing customers. We do something called user voice, which is product feedback both inside the product itself and with our customer care team. The third thing we do is we just literally talk to customers on the product team. Every cycle, so we run a 2-week sprint cycle for every one of our teams. At the beginning of that cycle, the product manager is responsible for grooming a backlog. I'm happy to talk more about how we do that. And that is incorporating both roadmap concepts that they had before and direct feedback that we get from customers and customer care every week. So every 2 weeks, you're looking at what are the stories we have, and some of those have been things we've had on the roadmap for a long time, and some are direct response to, here's something new we learned from a customer this week.
Our process is very similar. You know, one thing I would highlight, though, is product people love their product, right? And the product is always perfect. And you really know you have the voice of the customer in your organization when you stop doing something. When you actually say, I know you love that, and you really want to finish that project, but nobody cares about it. So stop it.
I think for us the same thing. We're running through NPS and customer feedback, but I think also what we're trying to do is also benchmark ourselves against the hypotheses that we created once building a product. So for example, we think the usage of this feature should be that. So that's a certain value attributed to that. If we then see from the actual usage of the product that it doesn't live up to the expectation, the customer don't use it, or they don't log in, they don't use a certain feature, we then also have an additional data point where we say, well, maybe we've been a little bit off there and correct our course.
Thanks. Peter, I think you had your hand up. If the mic could make its way toward the front.
Yeah. How important is it for you guys to provide services for small businesses like accounting and scheduling and everything else? I mean, how important has that become in the last couple of years?
Well, let's see. So it's always been important. I think the question is for each business, and I can answer for GoDaddy in particular, where does it fit in the spectrum of stuff that we do? So we think about building a digital identity for that small business. The digital identity starts with, how do I make sure that I'm visible on the web? As I get more sophisticated as a small business and want my site to do more, I do want things like scheduling. I do want things like e-commerce on my site. E-commerce then leads to things like accounting on the back end, and that leads to payment processing and a number of other pieces. So you don't have to build all that yourself, but I think it depends upon where you start as your sweet spot for what am I going to do better than anybody else and make that great for the small business. Then you look at what the adjacent needs are, and the customer will lead you there.
Yeah, I think the more you can provide a seamless integrated solution, that creates a lot of value for the client. But as Stephen said, I don't think you have to build all of that yourself. Personally, I like the idea of integrating into the accounting at the back end, because what everybody ultimately wants is to understand attribution and know what is that dollar doing for me. And we'd be very focused as an industry on CPL, cost per lead. Where I'd like to see us get to is cost per revenue dollar. And we can do that by really integrating into the back ends and really tracking a dollar of spend at the front end right the way through the lead process into the billing and the revenue management systems of these clients by that integration process, and therefore delivering a lot of value.
But I also think, remembering that it's a very scattered marketplace, a very segmented market, again, it can vary from the need, the strength of the need can vary from vertical to vertical, can vary from life stage to life stage between SMBs. So there might be, for e-commerce, it's obvious that you want to have this integration. Others might not need it right away. And also, I think, integrating it as a fixed component of your offering can actually be an obstacle sometimes, because people might have their own accounting software already. So I think the challenge here is to be as open and flexible as possible to a network of solutions that you can communicate with in order to then drive the necessary outcome for the client in terms of, attribution, in terms of, marketing outcome. I think that's important.
Great. I wish we had time for more questions, but we're actually at time, so I'd like you to join me in thanking the panel for a terrific discussion.